This one is goes back almost to the beginning of your career, I guess. And is this the third book of a trilogy?
It's not unintentional third book of a trilogy. The first book, People of the Year, which was my first book, written in 1951, I think, if I get that. That was the previous century, by the way, was about the people of the Barren Lands, the inland Inuit caribou people. And it came about when I went up there in 1947 to get away from memories of the war and to get away from my general feeling that the human species wasn't worth the powder to blow it to hell. I'd been watching them and taking part in the blowing to hell for several years, and my opinion of the species was low. So I didn't want to talk to human beings for a while, my kind. So I went north and ended up in contact with these people, and they were the remnants of a very large group, probably 3,000 or 4,000, as early as late as 1930, 1920. They had been absolutely destroyed by a series of disasters brought about by their contact with us. Nothing deliberate. Nobody went in to commit genocide on them. But they were disrupted in such a way that they were unable to carry on with their lives. And then when the whites pulled out, as they did, the commercial whites, the fur traders, pulled out because the price of fur was down, these people were left absolutely stranded. And they just went to hell in a bucket. And there were only 34 of them left alive when I arrived on the scene. And I was enormously attracted by them. They struck me. They actually restored some of my faith in Homo sapiens. Not all of it, mind you, but some of it, enough so that I could tolerate the thought of being a human being. And in consequence, I constituted myself their champion and wrote People of the Deer to bring the world's attention, Canada's attention, to what was happening up there. I thought that the proper actions, or some actions anyway, were being taken to save them from extinction. And I turned my attention to other things when I heard from friends in the North that disaster had struck these people once more. So I had to look at the situation again, and I went north in 1957 to see what was happening, and discovered a calamity that was even worse than I had recorded in People of the Deer. So I wrote a second book called The Desperate People. I knew what had happened to the others, the other part of the story, but it was so atrocious a story, a tale, that I didn't dare use it or describe it, tell the story in The Desperate People. I was afraid that I would just drive my readers away, that most European whites down south would say, enough, we don't want to go on with this, we don't want to hear any more about this stuff. But I now had the opportunity in this book to tell that story. And that story is the major part of the book. The early part, about a third of the book, is in a sense a revisiting of the early period when I was there and what happened to the Almu. But the latter part of the book is the story of the people of Back River, as they are called, and the tragedy that overwhelmed them and literally wiped them out. There were perhaps a dozen survivors, but the survivors were so broken and so split apart that they never could recover from what had happened to them.
The title, Walking on the Land, what's that mean?
It was a phrase used when, under conditions of adversity, natural, and there were often conditions of natural adversity. You might miss the caribou, for instance, or there might be a tremendously bad period of weather when you couldn't hunt, or the dogs might get rabies and die and you couldn't travel. Under those conditions, people suffered. An old man would get up sometime during the night, during the day, didn't matter, and he would simply say, I am going walking on the land. And everybody knew what he said. It meant that he felt the moment had come when, if he got out of the way, he would slightly increase the chances of survival of those who remained. So that is what the phrase means, walking on the land. But it's such a deep-rooted phrase, because their whole life of these people was walking on the land. And to walk on the land at the end of your life was to come to as near as one can imagine, to a perfect accommodation of life and death.
You're about to turn 80?
Yeah.
in the next little while.
Another 6 months if I'm lucky.
And,
Before I go walking on the land.
Well, I was about to ask. I mean, do you start thinking about that now?
I've dealt with that one a long time ago. I dealt with that one actually during the war, when the imminence of death was everywhere. You had no real expectation of surviving for very long. In some cases, you had no expectation of surviving the hour. So dealing with death was something that I learned to do very early on. And it has become, it's no problem for me at all. If the time comes, and time will come, when I am incompetent, incapable of looking after myself and of looking after those who are around me, I will go walking on the land for sure.
Don't do it for a while.
Thank you.
The book is Walking on the Land. I've been speaking with the author Farley Mowat, and Walking on the Land, published by Key Porter Books.